one of the things I always wanted to talk about too, with another poet too, is the idea of like the relationship between solitude and creation. And I think for me, that manifests itself when I am so busy that I can't create. I'm also busy with life that I have all these ideas that I want to write down and like really like unpack, but it's like I don't, unless I like my life comes down a little bit and I'm like taking a long, long walk. I've got nothing to do, and then my mind will just kind of like start like structuring it a bit more, and then I can sit down and be like, okay, or like that feeling, allow that feeling to come up. We were talking before about like I need to write this poem, you know. And I think it's such an interesting thing because that dichotomy of that relationship is always something that I always struggled with, you know. And I also saw you right on your on your Instagram. You posted this thing about freelancing and being on Witness, and I really loved that. It's one of the things that you say that I relate to so much. But yeah, you were like to freelance is to be on Witness, and you had this example. You had this poem talking about how you were like kind of like watching people, you're people watching almost, but in such a poetic way. It was beautiful. But it was like, yeah, you keep, am I this person? Am I this person? And I related to that, being of the world but not in the world, you know. And it's like you can see things that most people would just, you know, walk past by, but you have the vision, you have the kind of, you're the witness to it. But yourself is not, you're not witness. You kind of remove the self from the poem, and the poem becomes an expression of what you can see. Talk to me about that. Where did that feeling come from? First off, of like being on Witness. What does that mean to you?
I love what you say. I love what you say about the solitude thing. I have so much to say about that too. But I think so. That poem, it was very much circumstantial. Like I was where I am in the poem. I am seeing what I say I see in the poem. It's very literal, and it came from a profound sense of lack and loneliness. And I think it's one of those ones, like you said earlier, it's been brewing for a really long time. Like, and I think to be a freelancer is to be unwitnessed. It's, you spend so much time free. You're free, and that's like, woo, you're free. But no, you're free of all the things that make you feel needed. You're to be human is to be needed as well. Like everyone, I feel like if there's a trigger word, like everyone's like, you're not supposed to need anything. You're supposed to want, but you're not supposed to need. And I completely disagree. I think we are needing beings. I mean, it's one of the things that makes us not just a sort of unsentient mammal. Like we feel that we need people to employ us, yes, but to play with us, to include us, to be our companion in later life, to gossip about your first date, whatever it is. Like, and as a freelancer, the life structure is very, very, very different, because you're in and out of things. And I think there is a general understanding of that. But I think a lot of people who aren't freelance, when they imagine being a freelancer, they don't then exclude all the people that they see every day in that imagination. They're like, oh yeah, I could have all this freedom, all this time. But they don't think, but I wouldn't have met any of these people that I met through my 9 to 5 or the structure. You know, I didn't go to university, and I changed job every 6 months to every year up until the age of 23. So that community, on top of a freelance lifestyle, was brewing. And when I was walking around that day, I saw all these different people who, they weren't free. They had each other, and I didn't have that. And I think I thought to myself, you know, how it's very sad, but it's also a choice I'm making in order to live the life that I feel is necessary to be able to be inspired enough to create art. And if I didn't have this freedom and this solitude and this loneliness, then I wouldn't be able to express myself in the way that is most important to me. But this is the price that I'm paying, and that's to be unwitnessed most of the time.
Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And I completely 100% like pinpoint that feeling that I was talking about, because it is a decision. I thought I was the only one who understood, but obviously all other people understand too. But it's such a unexplainable things that I can't even explain to my friends.
I just butchered it too. That took me a long, long time to figure out what I was trying to say.
But no, it's beautiful because, like, honestly, because you have this idea that this lifestyle that you're chasing is going to be like this, you know, like, oh, I want to be a poet, I want to be free, I want to be able to express myself.
Yeah.
But what that comes with, you know, and I think a lot of people don't understand that.
Well, it comes at at a great cost. And I know people who haven't got the same experience. I know some people who are creatives, who have very rich circles. And I'm not saying that I don't. I do. I have people I love who love me, but I, due to various reasons, have spent a very large amount of time in solitude. And I think a lot of that is to do with having a later diagnosed autoimmune condition. It's a very lonely thing to have, and you tend to isolate yourself because people only have a certain bandwidth for support and patience. Unfortunately, it's just true. And especially in this country, we have a very can-do, suck it up kind of attitude. And I do know people who are able to create beautiful work and beautiful writing and still have very rich, full lives and not spend much time in solitude. But I do know that I don't work like that. Inspiration doesn't really come to me unless I've been mulling things over, and I don't know if it's right or wrong, but whatever. I most of my writing comes from intense periods of loneliness.
I completely agree.
Even the joyful stuff.
I completely agree, because you need time to reflect, right?
Yeah.
Like I wrote this thing that I haven't kind of formulated quite yet. I think more mainly because I'm still thinking about this idea, but about like how I feel like sometimes I feel like poetry has distanced myself from my friends, or like the act of me writing poetry. Like I have deep relationship with friends and I care about them deeply, but it kind of feels like, it's like did my need for to be understood get lost in the metaphors or the similes? And it's like, because it's like if I express myself, and we come back to what we were talking about before, if I express myself in a way, I can only really express myself in a way you understand, almost through poetry. Because like once you understand the poetry, or it feels like they try to understand me through poetry, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like they go, oh, like, like there's this disconnect that I'm feeling, and maybe I'm still thinking about this, right? But it's a disconnect that I'm feeling between them meeting me and like having that relationship that we had before, and them going, oh, like, like I read this poem about you. What did you mean by that? And I'm like, oh, but like I'm me, like before the poet, I'm still me. It kind of feels a disconnect between them trying to understand, and so I pull myself back. And it's like all of that just jumbled up in my mind, I'm trying to like untangle it.
How much of your poetry do you feel like is you trying to speak to yourself on a subject, or you trying to communicate outwardly to others?
I think a lot of them is to speak to myself, but I think recently, because of that tension, I'm finding sometimes like I want to say something to to others almost, like that would slip in because that's part of how I feel. That makes sense, It's like I only ever would use poetry to express a feeling, and when I first started, it was free, and I was like, okay, cool, I can just express.
It's always easier when you start.
Literally, right?
You're like, oh, such an original thought. And then after a while, you're like, how many times do I need to talk about the clouds before I come on?
How many times am I going to say the same thing again?
Yeah.
Different ways. And
oh God.
And it's that feeling of like, okay, have I said this too much, or am I again? It's one of those things.
I feel like we shouldn't even filter that either. It's just. We're all obsessed with novelty. I'm so obsessed with novelty. It's a fatal flaw. But it's the kind of constant need for everything in itself to be its own work of art that's separate in every total other way from anything else you've ever written. And so what if you have 6 love poems that all sound the same? Like if you recycle the same lines in new poems and things, I'm starting to make myself be okay with that, because sometimes things fit better elsewhere.
Absolutely.
That's something I'm trying to work on. And I think it sucks, to be honest, in a way, because I used to write poetry out of necessity. Like I needed to write something because I didn't feel okay if I didn't. Whereas now I have a very different relationship with writing, where I feel like it's something I want to experiment with now. I want to experiment with my writing. I want to see how I can shape something. Maybe I do have an inspirational thought and I want to see where I can weave it, but I'm so much more conscious, whereas I used to be unconscious. And part of me almost grieves the period of time where I wasn't trying to experiment and improve. I was just needing to. Now it definitely feels more like I'm putting effort in, not out of a want to best my old self, but because that I'm at a different place now with my writing, and it's harder now. It's that whole scale. I can't remember. I never remember. I always refer to it, and then I give a horrible analogy of it. But
that one there?
the one where you're like unconscious, or what is it? You're you're unaware, and then you become incredibly aware of how much you lack, and then you become competent. If anyone listens to this and knows what I'm referring to, then that you'll know what I'm trying to say. But it's always hard being in that second stage of being aware of how far there is, or where there is to experiment, or the number of avenues you can take. It's just,
that's 100% true. Speaking of that,
it's overwhelming.
it is overwhelming, but we push through poetry itself, right? We kind of use poetry as a way to deal with that overwhelmingness.
Yeah.
And the topic of that, I want to talk about your process for a little bit, right?
Okay.
So we mentioned before solitude and how important solitude is for that. How important do you think solitude is to you, to your specific process? Do you need it to create, or can you create when you're kind of feeling happy and everything's going great?
I have only got a couple of examples of ever creating happy. Most of my poems come from negative emotions, secondary negative emotions. It's not so much sadness or anger, because I know what they are. They're angry and sad, but it's the secondary emotions that are harder to unravel for yourself, which is why they end up in poems. So it's betrayal, or resentment, or sort of apprehension or anxiety or depression, a lot of those things, because they're hard. It's hard to figure out the root cause, and I think a lot of people have, especially now in the modern era of like online psychologists and stuff, we're always trying to intellectualize how we feel, pinpoint it down to one thing so we can address it and feel better, instead of actually just feeling it through. Whatever it is that's making me feel that way, better to just feel it and then stop feeling it after you felt it. No one does that because it's uncomfortable and horrible. I don't do that. And so most of my poems are very much, I think, processing those feelings and then negative. Whereas I do have a couple that come from utter surprise at how wonderful a feeling feels. And I'm like, oh, I want to capture this now. Like, this isn't I need to discover and express myself. This is I want to capture this moment. And I felt it a couple times, namely with gratitude and attraction. Those are normally the ones. And wonder, when something is wondrous. Like, yeah. That noise is wondrous. That's a really interesting noise.
Your mind just goes to the, how can I try to capture that? On that point,
It's very Jacob Collier.
I think this is a great question to ask, actually. So I'm fascinated by the scattered thoughts and how a poet's mind works. My mind works exactly the same. I was trying to like focus, but I knew you could hear it too, and I knew that because you could hear it, I could hear it, we were going to get out of the moment. Talk to me about the scattered thoughts when it comes to poetry. How do you take scattered thoughts and form a semblance of a cohesive poem?